Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of the tutorial series on JUCE 8 web views. My name is Wilczek. I'm the founder of the Wolfson blog and YouTube channel on audio programming. In the previous tutorial episode, we looked at how you can control a continuous audio parameter using a slider, be it in a C++ GUI or in a WebView UI. In this episode, we're going to look at how to control a parameter that can be true or false. Again, how it's been done traditionally in JUCE and how you can do it in a WebView UI. So imagine the use case. You have your audio plugin and you want to have some parameter that controls your audio that can take a value of true or false. And a typical example of such a parameter could be a bypass parameter. If bypass is on, then you want to abandon your processing. You just want to feed input through your plugin directly to the output. And if it's off, so if bypass is off, then you want to perform your plugin processing as usual. And again, in JUCE, traditionally, the parameter that's responsible for such a value is an AudioParameterBool, which can be either false or true. And in a typical C++ GUI, we would have a toggle button that you could turn on or off to directly control this parameter. In web views, of course, there's a little bit more complication involved, but the essential functionality is the same, so you can control your real-time audio parameter from a WebView-based GUI. And that's how we'll proceed in this tutorial. We'll first take an overview of the classes involved in both the traditional toggle button and the WebView-based toggle button. We'll then implement the parameter and processing involved with it in the audio domain. We'll then expose a C++ toggle button that will control this audio parameter. And finally, we'll implement a WebView-based toggle button that you can use to control your audio plugin's bool parameter. As usual, the full source code to this tutorial project is available on GitHub. You can find the link in the description below. And if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate leaving them here on YouTube in the comment section or in the dedicated JUCE forum thread, the link to which you can also find in the description. So, without further ado, let's go with the tutorial. Here are the classes involved in controlling a Boolean parameter that again can be true or false. Typically, you would have an instance of JUCE's AudioParameter Boolean class that probably sits within your audio processor ValueTreeState. And this is the model of our parameter, and this is the source of truth for all the UI or automation-based related control. And in a C++ GUI, your plugin would have typically a toggle button. And this toggle button then controls the audio parameter bool via a button parameter attachment. And what this attachment does is that it keeps these two values, these two instances, in sync. So if audio parameter bool changes, the attachment class detects it and updates the toggle button accordingly. For example, if you load a preset, the audio parameter bool can change, and then this attachment class will transfer this change to toggle button, and vice versa. If you, let's say via a click, change the value of this toggle button, then the attachment class also detects it and changes the underlying audio parameter bool. And again, as in the slider case, the WebView class relationships look very similar. So instead of a button parameter attachment, we now have a WebToggleButtonParameterAttachment. And this talks to not directly to some kind of toggle button, but it talks to WebToggleButtonRelay. And again, this relay class exposes ToggleState instance in our JavaScript frontend. So in the frontend, we're able to access this ToggleState object that comes from the JUCE framework. And based on this ToggleState, we can create a some kind of web toggle button. And again, you're not limited to any single technology here. You can use any web-based technology. So the simplest thing that we can do is an HTML input element of type checkbox that, again, must be synced in our JavaScript code with this toggle state. So if the user clicks in the WebView UI on our input HTML element, then we'll notify this toggle state, and we'll also observe this toggle state changes. And if the change happens, then we update this input HTML element. And this part of the diagram is also kept in sync. All these classes come from the JUCE framework, and your implementation here in HTML JavaScript can take advantage of it. So now that you know how these classes interact with each other, let's proceed with implementing the AudioParameterBool parameter in our tutorial plugin and its associated processing. Here's again our tutorial project, and we'll start with implementing a correct parameter ID in our parameter IDs. So previously we had here gain. Now let us add a bypass parameter. So we'll go const JUCE parameter ID bypass, and the name will be also bypassed, and the version number will be 1. Okay, and now we can add this to our plugin processor. So here in the constructor of our class, as you remember, we created this audio processor value tree state by passing here a parameter layout. And we created this layout here. So simply, we can add here our Boolean parameter. So you go layout, add, stud, make, unique, audio parameter bool. And here we pass ID bypass. Name will be bypass. And then the default value will be false because we want our plugin to be processing. And then we also want to pass some options. So we go audio parameter bool attributes. We need to instantiate this class. And we'll pass here with label bypass. Okay, once that's done, we want to implement our processing. But to be able to implement this processing, we want to access this parameter in our audio plugin. So previously, we just captured, an atomic of type float to have this gain as a kind of synchronized raw value. But here we can do something different. Namely, we'll have a member simply of type AudioParameterBool, and this will be a reference member. And this is fine because this reference is tied to this state. So this reference will be destroyed first before the state is destroyed. So, and here we'll simply say bypass. And because it's a reference, of course, I need to type it's JUCE AudioParameterBool. And because it's a reference, there's only one place we can initialize it in. It's here. So we go bypass, and we do exactly the same thing as before. We go state get parameter ID : bypass dot get param ID. And this, as you see, it returns a ranged audio parameter. But we know that this parameter is of type audio parameter bool, so we can cast it to the appropriate type. Okay. So before this get parameter, we insert dynamic cast JUCE : audio parameter bool and an asterisk to indicate it's a pointer. And finally, we dereference this. So typically this would be considered, bad practice in C++ because we're explicitly doing a dynamic cast here. But since we know that this parameter exists, we created it ourselves in create parameter layout. I don't consider this bad. But there are better ways to do this. And for example, you can always check out the Juice's WebView plugin demo. They have a nice helper functions there that make it a little bit smoother and not so boilerplatey, so to say. But now we have access to the value of this bypass. And here in our processing, here we go. Before we apply this gain, we can use this bypass to determine if we simply want to return. So we can go if bypass get, and this, as you can see here, this gets the Boolean value of these parameters. Then we simply return. And this is fine because we get the buffer as a reference. And if our plugin is bypassed, then we simply return. You could, of course, argue that maybe it makes sense to still, measure the output level of the plugin here. But for the sake of this tutorial, we'll just implement a bypass like this. So now let us build our plugin. Okay, our plugin built successfully. So now we can add GUI to control this audio parameter. So for this, we need to go to Plugin Editor. And here you see that we got all these members. So we can create our toggle button that will control this parameter. So we go JUCE ToggleButton, and we'll call this bypass button. And we'll add here a label called bypass. And here we also need to add the attachment. So we'll go JUCE button parameter attachment. And this will be bypass button attachment. So once again, this attachment will keep in sync the value of the AudioParameterBool that we have in our processor and the value of this toggle button. Now that we have this button in place and this attachment, we need to initialize them. So we go to plugineditor.cpp. And here, after gain slider attachment, because that's how we declared these members, we can initialize the bypass button attachment. So we go bypass button attachment. And here we do something similar. So again, we go processor ref state get parameter ID bypass get param ID. And we pass here the button to control. So this will be bypass button. And this undo manager in this tutorial is null pointer. Of course, we need to end with a comma. And here we need to dereference what we got because this returns a pointer. So we want to dereference it to pass a reference to our bypass button attachment. And this is exactly what we did in plugin processor, but there we explicitly cast it to this AudioParameterBool. We don't have to do this here for the button attachment. Okay, and now we need to do two things that typically happen with components that are within our component, and plugin editor is a component. So what we need to do, we need to add and make visible this bypass button. So we go in the constructor, add and make visible bypass button. And then we need to position this in our C++ GUI. So in the resized method, we go bypass button, set bounds, again, remove from top 50, and then let's say reduced 10. And here is a typo. So it's not very fancy. We just have the components from top to bottom, but this is just for tutorial purposes. So now we want to build our plugin and test whether bypass actually works. So if you're new to this tutorial, we need to generate the project first. So we can go cmake-s.-b build. This generates a C++ project to the build folder. And now we can build this cmake-build. Okay, and now we can run our plugin. So we go build, plugin JUCE WebView plugin artifacts debug standalone JUCE WebView plugin.exe. Okay, and we got an error code here. That's because we have not launched our development server. So we can go to plugin and to Y directory. And as you can see, we have this public folder here, so we can go into it. And here are all HTML files. So we can simply start a development server here by going npx http server. And this will host what we have here. Exactly. And now let me start our plugin. Okay, as you can see, we have our plugin here, and we have this bypass button. So let me decrease the gain and enable audio input. Okay, and we're getting some input here. And now when I click bypass, I experience this exactly to stay as it is, right? We're not doing any processing. We're just feeding this through. And now if I unclick this, I am able again to control this. It can go to 0. I can make it louder, and I can go to 0, etc. Okay, so we see that the C++ toggle button works and actually controls our parameter. So now we can proceed to the WebView-based toggle button, and we'll again start with plugin editor here. So we need to go to the header file, and here we see that we have this relay and attachment classes for the gain. So underneath them, we'll create the corresponding ones to the bypass. So we'll go JUCE web toggle button relay, and we'll call this web bypass relay. And under the slider attachment, we'll create JUCE web toggle button parameter attachment, and we'll call this web bypass toggle attachment. Okay, now that we have them, we need to initialize them in the constructor of plugin editor. So here under web gain relay, I can initialize web bypass relay, and I can pass an ID bypass get param ID, and that suffices. By the way, this is something that changed in one of the newer JUCE releases. So I'm using here JUCE 8.0.4, and there you just need to pass the parameter ID to the relay class. Okay, and then I scroll down on here, and you can see that we passed to the web browser component this with options from, and this was for the slider. So now I need to do the same thing for the toggle button with options from web bypass relay. Okay, and this connects the relay class with the web browser component, so with our web view. And finally, we need to initialize our attachment. So we go web bypass toggle attachment. And here we again go processor ref state get parameter ID bypass get param ID. Then we do comma, and then we pass here not some kind of HTML toggle button, but we pass here web bypass relay. That's what this attachment is for. That's what it will think for us. And then we pass here a null pointer because we don't want to have an undo manager in this tutorial. Okay, and again, this get parameter returns a pointer, so we need to dereference it when we pass it to the attachment in the same way that we did to the C++ GUI attachment, right? Here, this code is very, very similar. And actually, that's all that we need to do in our plugin editor for this component to be exposed, for the this ToggleState JavaScript object to be exposed. Okay, now we can get actually a checkbox, a toggle button, you may say, in our index.html. So we go UI public index.html. And here we can go input, type checkbox, and we'll go ID, assign bypass checkbox. Okay, and we can also create a label for it. So we go label for bypass checkbox, and we'll name this bypass. Okay, maybe let us insert one more line break here. And this is all that we need in our index.html. And now our code in index.js is also very succinct. So here under slider initialization, we'll initialize our bypass button. So as a reminder, this happens when the DOM content is loaded. And here we need to retrieve the checkbox. So we go const bypass checkbox document get element by ID. And we pass here bypass checkbox. This is the ID of our input HTML element. And then we retrieve the toggle state that we exposed thanks to the WebToggleButtonRelay class. So we go const bypass toggle state assign JUCE. This is the backend. This is the JavaScript frontend framework piece that we use to interact with the C++ backend. This is something that we imported using this import asterisk as JUCE from juice/index.js. And here we go, get toggle state, and we pass the parameter value under which we have our toggle state to control. And then we here set the onInput function to be able to detect when the value of the checkbox changes, when the user clicks on it, and so that we can pass it to the backend. So we go bypass checkbox on input, assign function, and here we go, bypass toggle state, set value, and we pass here this checked. So this will simply transfer the property of whether this input HTML element is checked or not. And then we need to do this also in the other direction. So if the parameter changes, also the WebView button should be updated as well. So we go bypass toggle state, value change event, add listener, and here we can pass a lambda. So we don't take any arguments, but we simply, within this callback, we go bypass checkbox checked, assign bypass toggle state, get value. And that's actually all that we need in our JavaScript, HTML, and C++ to have a WebView-based toggle button. As you remember, we changed plugin editor, so we need to recompile the project. Okay, and let me run the plugin. Okay, as you can see, let me make this quieter. As you can see, there is no bypass. That's because we need to reload this page. Exactly, we reloaded it, and then bam, we have the bypass button. And if I click on the C++ bypass, you see that this value here is set as well. And the same here happens here. The same thing happens here. If I click on this bypass button, this is reflected in the C++ GUI. So let me once again mute the input to avoid feedback. And as you can see, this stays in sync all the time. And it actually bypasses our plugins processing. So what happens here, if I click, then the toggle button state changes, the parameter attachment detects it and changes the underlying audio parameter bool. value, and then the WebToggleButtonAttachment sees this and updates the relay class, and relay class informs the ToggleState instance, and ToggleState instance informs us that we handle this in our JavaScript callback code, and vice versa, it goes the other way around. So that's how you can implement a toggle button in your WebView UI in JUCE 8. So let's recap. We want to have Boolean parameters, which can be either true or false, that control the audio processing of our audio plugin. And to this, we need an AudioParameterBool that sits in our AudioParameterValueTreeState in our audio processor. And this parameter can be controlled from the C++ UI, for example, with a toggle button, which also uses this attachment class that connects the AudioParameterBool with the toggle button in the C++ UI. And if we want to control this parameter from a WebView UI, then we can implement our checkbox in our WebView UI however way we want, in our HTML, JavaScript, CSS, or maybe some web framework. And then we need to use the ToggleState that's exposed by the JUCE framework Frontend library that communicates with our C++ backend, and namely with a relay class that sits in our plugin editor. And this relay class is in sync with the attachment class that, again, is in sync with the AudioParameterBool. So in case of WebViews, this is a little bit more complicated, but as you saw in this tutorial, it can be quite fast and quite simple and works really, really well. And it's definitely a cool option to use in your WebView. So remember that attachment classes keep the UI controls and the parameter in sync, although, the Webflow is a little bit more complicated. Again, if you don't understand something, if you want to go through this in more detail, then don't hesitate checking out the source code. The link to it you can find in the description below. If you still have any questions or comments, then don't hesitate putting them in the comments section on YouTube or in the dedicated JUCE forum thread. That link to it you can also find in the description below. There are a lot of people on the JUCE forum that are more than happy to help you if you have more specific questions on this. And finally, please subscribe to the JUCE channel, so this channel, to the Wolfson channel, and give a thumbs up, and we'll see you in the next episode of this tutorial series. Take care.